Okay, hello, friends. We are dealing with the treatise on white magic, and we are on page 288 approximately. We're only doing a few pages per program. The material is so deep. And we are in Rule 10, a mammoth rule. I think I looked at it, and it was about 170 pages, 70 pages in the book. So that's just about a fourth of the book spent on Rule 10. I keep on puzzling over this eightfold chart that we've been looking at, and I just noticed another interesting kind of anomaly. You know, the base of the spine is controlled by the adrenals and the head center by the pineal, and so we seem to skip one of the glands and one of the centers. But then when we look at the thyroid, see, here we have self-assertion, and then the self-conscious life. Well, pineal is more than that. Pineal is also related to the highest head center, which is not really, well, it is discussed as the upper brain, I suppose. So it relates to the highest head center. So the very bottom is the pineal, and the very bottom is the adrenals, followed by the pineal gland in elevation. In the center of the head, and controlling that area where magic is performed. It's a meeting of land and water and air. But then if we look at the next gland, or self-expression, we notice if we skip one, we relate the thyroid gland of the throat center to the sex glands, gonads and ovaries of the sacral center. So again, we have this relationship if we skip one of the glands. Now, we also find this very same skipping listing if we look at the pineal gland and the pituitary, which are also a pair. The pineal relating to the soul and to the higher faculties, and the pituitary to the personality. And we notice, again, there is a linking here, not a skipping, but a linking between the pancreas and the heart. It's not really a gland, but maybe we should call it, let's just see, I think I would call it thymus, Thymus, thymus gland. And I wonder, can I somehow bring that over? Or maybe not. Maybe not. I'm not greatly adept at this, but let's just see if I can possibly do that. Perhaps put this here and move this back a little and do it that way. Okay. But anyway, there are links between the different glands and centers, and they do not seem to be continuous. Let's put it like that. So here remember that this is the chart of the man as he is supposed to be, with the full development of the will at the perhaps fifth initiation. And then it's followed by creative work, but one would think of the creative work of the soul a bit more. Here's another threesome, the monad, the triad, and the egoic lotus. And in this case, the egoic lotus or causal body represents the third aspect and is thus connected with the throat center. So here we have a very powerful first ray under Pluto. Here we have a creative aspect under the self-expression of the soul under the throat center, involving the thyroid gland as well. And then the pineal gland, it seems to me to relate specifically to the soul energy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it involves other and higher energies as well. And then we get more into the realm of personality. It's a bit unusual to see self-perpetuation above the mental life, but remember, we're talking about the self. And I think he said somewhere here, I wonder if he did, that the self referred to is the self-realization of the spiritual man. Now, who is the spiritual man? It's partially the soul consciousness, yes, but it's also, as well, the triadal component of the man, and also, still more, well, maybe we would call it the divine self. It's the monad. So it seems to me that when we look at the self here, we're looking at the soul triad, but finally, if we really think about it, the real area of self-assertion in our energy system is the monad itself, and none of this would exist. Not our triad, not our soul, not our personality, unless the monad had asserted itself. Now, you know, the base of the spine is ruled by Pluto, but there is an interesting triangle, Aries, Pluto, Shambhala. It's a very first ray kind of triangle. So it connects the base of the spine in a way with Shambhala. And from another perspective, the head center should be connected with Shambhala. It's certainly connected with Atma, and there are aspects of it which should be connected with Shambhala. It's a very complex center, and when Roberto Assagioli asked Master DK to elaborate upon the head center, he said he really couldn't do that because it was one of the very esoteric and one of the guarded secrets, so he could not elaborate, at least in a book meant for the general public, upon the head center, at least not yet. In some of the Hindu books, there is some elaboration, and factors are mentioned which are not yet mentioned in the blue books, but I have a feeling that the next dispensation for which we are trying to prepare through assimilation will have a lot of the first ray in it, and maybe more detail on the head center will be released. We certainly have to go through this purging time when everything is coming to the surface prior to the reappearance of the Christ, and it's a very plutonic time and Vulcanian time, and we'll just have to see how much can be revealed as Pluto brings to the surface all kinds of things which human beings did not suspect of themselves or of humanity as a whole. But we have to live through that in order to have the way cleared for the presentation of the next teaching. You notice how the First World War came along, and well, eventually an armistice was enacted, and a temporary way was cleared for the presentation of the intermediate teaching through Alice Bailey, the second installment. Of course, the war really went underground and emerged again, and the teaching continued even during the war, but at least it got its start after the major conflict, after the major war to end all wars. So I keep on coming back to this, well, you know, he says it's very intricate, and he says it's complex, and it's abstruse, and it is. And, I keep on meditating upon it, and as I think we all should. And then we will gain more light in the process. Because these various factors are arranged in ways, in a sequence that we might not uh, suspect. And each one of the centers has functions different from the ones that are here given. But we're looking very much at the physical organism of the man and how these higher centers are connected with structures within the physical organism, such as the cerebrospinal nervous system, or the sympathetic and maybe parasympathetic nervous system. But I think the parasympathetic has more to do with the pineal gland and with the ability for soul consciousness to affect the system. And certainly the heart center is a lot more than the bloodstream and the nourishing of the cell life, but he's giving us a particular point of view. And a lot of understanding of Master DK is to figure out the point of view which he is presenting. He varies his point of view, and different points of interest, different sources, different centers have a different function depending upon the point of view. I'm thinking, from one perspective, let's say the earth is the base of the spine of the solar logos. From another perspective, it's very, we might say it's connected with the mental unit. Certainly its symbolism is the same, interestingly enough. And there's a kind of a splenic connection with the earth. And, therefore in the structure and functioning and physiology of the solar logos, the earth has its place there. And of course, in terms of form creating, it has its place in relation to the sacral center. So different, I think that every center, or, what can we call it? Every principle expressing itself through the solar logos may involve as much as 3 chakras for each principle. When you take a look at the base of the spine, you find out, interestingly, that not only is Earth involved, but Pluto is involved and Mercury is involved. And there are other ways in which we could look at Saturn and even Uranus, but let's just say certainly Mars is involved. So what do we have there? We have Earth, Pluto, Mars, those 3, and Mercury as the Kundalini active, whereas Mars is considered Kundalini latent. So we're presented with a picture of great relativity, and we have to keep our mind flexible, not to lock in a particular center, chakra, source, area of the anatomy, etc., not to lock it in to one function only. And this is shown even in the disciple. Let's just say that the sun, or a non-sacred planet veiled by the sun, rules the heart center for the average individual, but Jupiter carries on that function for the disciple and probably for the initiate. And, page 517 of esoteric astrology, we have the same factor with the throat center, where Earth is the usual ruler, but then along comes Saturn, and then at a certain stage, the 7th ray takes over, and we begin to speak in magical terms, and probably Uranus is somewhat involved, and certainly, Mercury has a lot to do with speech, and will be brought into relation to the throat center somehow. So we have to remain flexible in our assignment of the positions of the various planets, chakras, centers, points of concentration, because they vary according to, I think, what the Tibetan call something like the law of mutability or the law of mutation. And you can imagine how he is able to flexibly look at all these different relationships and see how a particular uh, point of force, point of energy has a different function depending upon the combination, that he is witnessing. Well, I'm just, as hopefully we would do, pondering this most difficult chart, abstruse chart, and gaining more from it as we go. Let's see, did he say anything here? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it all depends on the context. Now, you see something similar happening when you go to a treatise on cosmic fire around page 259 or 260, somewhere in there. You say, well, we know what are the principles of man, but do we? From what perspective do we know what are the principles? There are all these different perspectives, and sometimes what we thought was an invariable principle, always found in the manifestation of the man, is eliminated and something higher or lower is inserted. So there are the principles of man from a higher perspective. I've dealt with this that's in the written commentaries found on Makara, or maybe a lower perspective, a more average perspective, where the principles are viewed in a different way, and certain of the higher principles are not considered to be included. So read through that section, and maybe if you wish, see what I said about it in the commentaries on that particular, is it a chapter or section, around page 260. Let's just see, I guess, will I ever get started on today's work? That's a good question. Treatise on Cosmic Fire, and here, let's say 259. Okay, what is the mind aspect? What's the monastic principle? And so forth. And here it is. Basically starting, I think, on page around 261, I guess. The monad, the threefold triad, the egoic body, and then the threefold nature, and so forth. But there, here's one look at the principles of man, the monad, pure spirit, the one and only, then the monadic trinity, and then the sun aspect, and then the lower quaternary. That's one way to look at the principles, but there are other ways to look at the principles, and they're given here, and there are 5 of them. Page 262, 263. And here's something even more abstruse, perhaps. And then we descend to monadic egg, Atma, Buddhi, etc. They're all changing constantly. Here's another one, with really begins with the spiritual will, or ascending from the etheric body and doesn't go any higher than Atma. That's another one. And here's a more objective type of development. Anyway, here's another presentation which ends with the astral vehicle. It is not considering the etheric or physical at all. And all of these are the principles of man seen from different contexts. So somewhere around 10 pages, this abstruse subject is dealt with, and more than I could do right now off the top of my head. I have written about it, hopefully some years ago, with clarity, some degree of clarity, as much clarity as I could muster at the time. But anyway, this is all about the law of mutation and the relativity of meaning and function of any energy center or force center. The relativity of function, depending on the context, of any energy or force center. Now, maybe after 20 minutes of this, could be time, excuse me, to go into the subject of the day. We did have fun with to will, to know, to dare, and to be silent. And we can look at that in different ways as well, and the different centers involved for the disciple, given here as the ajna center at the base of the pine sacral center, and I suppose solar plexus center somewhere. I suppose. Yes, indeed. So we see that not all of the higher centers are even the main concern of the disciple, but rather the mastery and control of some of these lower centers. The complexity of the subject is also increased. This is our consolation, if I can put it this way. And remember, we're looking at an introductory book here. This is not a book that is considered one of the later advanced books. And yet, look at the subject matter. I realize that the teaching given here is both deep and abstruse, but it is needed for the few, and their numbers will increase as time elapses. Remember, DK says that many initiates of the fifth degree will be shortly needed. So there's an intensified training at this time for people who can begin to approach such possibilities. It seems like a steep climb, doesn't it? The complexity of the subject is also increased by the fact that each ray holds within its teaching a different approach and a different method for those souls who are found responsive to its peculiar impulse, and let's just say, get rid of that. I like my little blue bracket here. If I can use it. Note, we are speaking of the responsiveness of souls, and not the action and the intelligence of personalities. All right, so now we get to the subject matter. I always feel, it's often necessary to consider this material in what ultimately is a cursory manner, not a truly in-depth studential manner where we would just take the time to really get into even a sentence or two and spend the whole hour doing that. So then, my conscience afflicts me, and then I think, well, maybe there's something more that can be said that will be illuminating. Maybe that is possible. And, it's only possible up to a point given the depth of the teaching. But here we are then at Commentary 21. And he talks here about ray teaching. Is that the subject here? Each ray holds with its teaching a different approach. I think I want to, kind of enlarge that because it comes to our attention as important, and a different method for those souls who are found responsive. So this is advising how the soul is to respond to life circumstances. And I've memorized these, of course, use it or lose it. I've just considered it so important. And I've used these mantras which verge upon unity in 7 different ways to induce the sense of unity in my own consciousness. And as we all know, I mean, we can go through the day and there are moments when the unity of all things may present itself, but other moments that are of a lower vibration and value where we stand within the illusion and the unity evades us. So he says, I've given here the 7 keys of each of the ray methods. We might say methods for what? Let's just say one way to look at the methods is methods to achieve the realization of unity or even oneness, which is beyond unity. Now, if I was really being accurate, I wouldn't capitalize everything. I'd just say that, unity and oneness. I reserve my total capital letters for that which lies beyond the universal demonstration, the periodical universal demonstration. So anyway, these methods, they can be studied in relation to the above tabulations and in connection with the 4 words we have been considering. Well, he gives us a real project. You can almost feel that, okay, student X in the new esoteric schools, this is your assignment. Study the following 7 stanzas in relation to the 8-fold, 7-fold, 8-fold tabulations here given, and in relation to will, to know, to dare, and to be silent. And that would be quite a research paper, wouldn't it? So these can be studied in relation to the above tabulations and in connection with the 4 words we have been considering. Okay. We must remember that to will is the prerogative of spirit. Yes, and indeed, this is to be emphasized. The prerogative of spirit, monad. To know is the function of the soul. To dare is the duty of the personality. And to be silent is the ultimate dharma or destiny of the matter aspect of the animal nature in its interplay with the soul. Well, that's just perfect. And I knew, how it is, what do they call it? Something like cryptonesia, or where you sort of memorize something, you don't know where you got it from, but there it is in your consciousness. And I can see that this particular paragraph or section made quite an impact upon me as I tried to associate the 4 activities, to will, to know, to dare, to be silent, with different aspects of the man. To will, the monad or spirit, to know, the soul or consciousness, to dare, the personality, but the personality, the kind of daring we're talking about, personality wouldn't undertake that daring unless guided by higher principles, and then to be silent, the fate or dharma or duty of the matter aspect, the lunar vehicles of the animal nature of the man, and we all have them, and their interplay with the soul. So the idea here is let the soul control, and the aspects and the matter aspects of the personality remain quiescent and obedient, to obey, silent obedience. Now, it's my impression, I can't tell you where, that I've done some work on these 7, and that maybe, since they appear in various places, I wish I could locate them right now, there may have already been some commentary work done here. But, let's go on in the context. Let the forces come together. There's a great factor of centralization here for the first ray. Let them mount to the high place, which I suppose is actually, in a way, anatomical. And where would it be? Head center, perhaps, or soul consciousness. But anyway, we're not looking out through some lesser force center of the mechanism. We're looking out from a center which is lofty and gives us a very high perspective on what's happening. Let them mount to the high place, which is, it may well be the center of the head center, or even eventually the jewel in the lotus. Let's just limit this at first to the soul consciousness, but we might find, in fact, that we could carry it even further. But let them mount to the high place, and from that lofty eminence let the soul look out upon a world destroyed. So it really is, this is about soul consciousness. Oops. This is about solo logoic, I won't do, soul consciousness. Let the soul look out upon a world destroyed, and all attachments are gone. Attachments to the personality and maybe even to the causal body. Then let the word go forth. This is the word of the true consciousness. I, the true consciousness, the true being, I still persist. The true being consciousness still persists, even though the attachments to the personality and its worlds and the attachment to the personality and to the content of the causal body has vanished. I guess we can interpret some of these mantrams, great statements, at various levels. So there's the centralization factor. I'm going to just write that word because it's an important word. That's such a first-ray word. So the forces are coming together and being elevated. They're being carried up into a relative heaven. Heavens are relative. There are a number of them. St. Paul talked about a 7th heaven, right, as it was reflected in the 3rd. And the 3rd heaven, really, it has a lot to do, I think, with the higher mental plane, not with Devachan so much. Let the forces come together. Let them mount to the high place. And from that lofty eminence, let the soul look out upon a world destroyed. Then let the word go forth. I still persist. So this is what persists? A supra-personal consciousness and being. That persists. So it's not that the personality persists at all. It's that the real uh, the real man persists. Okay, I still persist. Well, you can, you first ray souls, you can read this to yourself and you can memorize it and you can practice drawing all the energies of your etheric system to a high place, and even all the energies of the personality um, to a high place. Your consciousness is drawn to a high place, and it looks out upon the personality, and maybe, from a certain perspective, even looks out upon what we normally call that limitation of soul consciousness, the consciousness within the causal body. And egoic lotus, that is a limitation upon soul consciousness, because the true ego is the spiritual triad. And if we look at maybe a totally capitalized ego, we're going to find the monad there, because it is a being within an egg, the world egg in the microcosmic sense. I'll read it again. Let the forces come together. Let them mount to the high place, and from that lofty eminence let the soul look out upon a world destroyed. Then let the word go forth. I still persist. What is speaking? Let's just say the true higher man or higher being is enunciating the word. So we have to learn the difference between thinking and speaking as a personality, thinking and speaking as a soul in incarnation, and thinking and speaking as a consciousness which has been abstracted from its personal prison. Anyway, how would we link this? How would we link this to will, to know, to dare, and to be silent? Well, I won't undertake that now. We could do it. Maybe I'll reserve it for the future, when, as I intend to be a student at one of these esoteric schools, I'll have to undertake that linking. But meanwhile, just to say that it can be interpreted in this way, we can lay out before us the 8. Well, let's go up here and I'll show you what I mean. We can lay out these 8: cell life, sensory life, mental life, vital life, and then everything related to the self-consciousness, self-expression, self-perpetuation, self-assertion. We can lay out those 8. We can lay out these 7: self-assertion, self-expression, self-conscious life, self-perpetuation, mental life, sensory life, cell life. And we can lay out to will, to dare, to know, and to be silent, and then start comparing these wonderful, evocative stanzas, which induce in us, I would say, those higher states of realization, if we can but understand what we're saying, and we can make the correlations. To do that, I would have to diverge and digress. Well, it's not really a digression. I'm tempted, of course. If a random thought comes to me about how to relate things, I will. But remember, we're controlling everything from the point of the self-assertion of the spirit. And these mantrams, the final mantram in each one of the statements is like a word of power. And it is spoken from the perspective a very high perspective, which is abstracted from imprisonment within the personality. Well, okay, for myself, being second-ray soul, I like this next one very much, and I practice with it very much, especially the final mantram in it, the final statement. Let all the life be drawn to the center. See, there's somehow there is this in-gathering for all of these. So let's just say almost always we find an in-gathering of many diverse and even scattered forces to a center of power along a particular ray line. So let all the life be drawn to the center, capital C, and it's a heart center really, but then the soul is a heart, and strangely, the monad on the second plane has a kind of a heart center function as well. I mean, if you think about the way, let's see, I wonder, I had hoped in vain, I had hoped, but hoped in vain, I'm afraid, AAB diagrams. Okay, so maybe there's something there, and I'll just open that. And then I also want to open Tuya's work here, which is even more elaborate and I think in some ways more accurate. So here's the diagrams from Tuya. And yeah, well, what you notice is that the heart center etherically is found on the second subplane. So you would expect to find a head, heart, throat triangle on the first three subplanes. Well, these are systemic subplanes, but now let's look at the cosmic subplanes, number 1, number 2, number 3. So this whole monadic plane is associated with the heart. Some kind of, the monad carries a kind of second ray function as well as a first ray function. I guess when the true monad is released into the logoic plane. Oh goodness, I'm totally divided. What can I say? The sun is shining, so there's a fourth ray image here. The true and released monad is the volatile essence, the flying essence released without a vehicle, or at least without its usual temple, into the sea of fire. Then what happens, I don't know, but let's just say it's likely that one of three circles takes over, or three triangles, and that becomes, in a way, the new vehicle for the monad, ultimately a first, second, or third ray monad. But there is a definitely liberation that occurs. And it's on this logoic plane that the first ray function of the monad would manifest most powerfully, and there's a heart function, like a second subray, for the monad, all 7 types, in 7 types of vehicles, or 7 types of temples of Ezekiel. Right. Okay, so I still persist. Let all the life be drawn to the center. Is that the soul? Is that the monad? And thus enter into the heart of love divine. And the egoic, the soul in the egoic lotus is considered the heart center of the monad. Then from that point of sentient life, so now we're relating to feeling. We're relating, we remember how the solar plexus was ruling the sympathetic nervous system, and the solar plexus is the second, second center out of the lower three, base of the spine, solar plexus, and then sacral. You kind of skip one. From the base, first ray, to the solar plexus, second ray, and then down to the sacral center, third ray. At least they're associated with the three major principles in that way, although they have other rays we can consider in relation to those centers. So we're dealing with sentiency, sensitivity, responsiveness, consciousness, feeling, sensitivity, responsiveness, consciousness. Let the soul realize the consciousness of God. That's the key. It's not just the power of God, not just the livingness of God, the persistence of the immortal factor, but the consciousness of the immortal factor. And let the word go forth, reverberating through the silence, and that's a hint, because the silence will reveal. If you've ever tried it, in the silence, the forces gather. Whoops. I hope that this is... We did not save the document. You want to save it? Yes, I want to save it. Let me save this document. Let the word go forth, reverberating through the silence. And this is the one I've based so much of my writing on, my thinking, and my practice. And that is, naught is but me. Naught is but me. And it's a capital Me, of course. Naught is but me. This is the me, obviously. Whoopsie. This is not a valid number. Thank you. Okay. This is the me, which includes all things, and naught remains, which is not included. So whether you're looking at a high form of life or a low form of life, or something that you hardly consider to be life at all, naught is but me. Then this can be practiced. Use that mantra. Look around you, look around yourself, focus on anything. If it's there, if you're perceiving it, it's in a state of isness. It is, because you cannot perceive a negation. You cannot perceive that which is not. And because it is included in everything. In other words, it is not ejected, it is not cast out, it is part of the everything. And there is, this naught includes that everything. So if it can be registered in your perception, it is you. Now what a statement, right? If it can be registered in your perception, and so many things that are not registered in our perception are we, I as well. Okay, it is you. Naught is but me. So let me, read this again, and with the hope that I'm saving properly. I'm not sure that I'm saving properly. You just give me a break here for just a minute. I'm going to see. 1990. Yeah, I'm saving. Okay. Naught is but me. Let me read it again, because in the reading, without stopping for elaboration, more may come. Let all the life be drawn to the center and enter thus into the heart of love divine. Then from that point of sentient life, let the soul realize the consciousness of God. Let the word go forth, reverberating through the silence, naught is but me. And you can really ponder that word for word, phrase by phrase, line by line, and it will give more and more as we bring it in to ourselves. Now, this is especially for second ray souls, but I would think that if you're a second ray monad, this type of contemplation could also be effective. Okay, so work on this one particularly because, you know, Master DK as a second ray master will gather his serious students from among those who have the soul ray on the second ray or the monadic ray on the second ray. And if the soul ray is on the second ray, then there's a part of the spiritual triad which is very strongly on the second ray as well, because the spiritual triad is the truer soul, let us say. I can't say it's the only soul, because soul is consciousness, whatever the vehicle may be, and extends all the way. You know, monad has soul, and also even the great one life has its universal consciousness, which can be considered the soul. But, you know, I still persist for the first ray. It's such a powerful mantram to keep the life aspect, life and consciousness aspect going. And naught is but me for the second ray, which is all about identification with every single perception that you can possibly have. Now, maybe in this program I have room for one more. Let's see if I do, and then I'll continue, because it's so important, these 7 techniques for the different types of souls. So this is the third ray, relating to the third ray soul, or the third ray above. Let the army of the voice, responsive to the word, cease their activities. You know, so there again, the silence, because so much is accomplished in the silence. Let knowledge end in wisdom. So let knowledge end in wisdom, and there is a difference, of course. Venus is that planet which is particularly good at transforming knowledge into wisdom. And here again we have the quiescence, the lack of activity, which the third ray type so much needs, because it abuses activity and lets activity veil reality. Let the point vibrating become the point quiescent. So remember that one of those words for the third ray, an integrative word for the third ray, for the third ray is stillness. And all lines gather into one. And all lines gather. So in other words, we're dealing with the many and the one and the many. And people who are on the third ray, they're so aware of the many, but they have to learn how to solve this problem of the many and convert the many into one. Let the point vibrating become the point quiescent, and all lines gather into one. It's a bit like what was going on for the second ray. Let's see if I can look at that there. Let all the life, well, be drawn to the center. There's this constant ingathering. And I just want to say, for all of these, note the factor of ingathering in all of these powerful statements. All right, we're in Ray 3. Let the soul realize the one in many, and let the word go forth. Again, this is a higher word. This is not any kind of personal word. Okay, go. Let the word go forth. I'm sorry, I've made a mistake there. Let the word go forth, or say a higher word, in perfect understanding. So we have a sequence here. We have knowledge leading to wisdom and perfect understanding. In the beginning of A Glamour, a World Problem, he does deal with the contrast between wisdom and understanding. Somehow understanding is a linking factor between wisdom and knowledge. And here is this final mantram, which we look for in each case, and which souls on these rays should particularly meditate upon. Okay. I am the worker and the work. I am both. So I am the one and the many, the one that is. All of these, okay, let's see if I can get this correct. Okay. Trying to make this work. But my computer's a little overfull and it's having problems. So all of these, let's call words of power, lead to oneness, to the realization of the one. And maybe it's particularly difficult for the third ray type to realize the one because they are so overcome with diversity and the outer form. You know, we're supposed to, on the third ray, not rush from point to point or be deluded by the outer forms. And that's difficult for the materialistic third ray type. Basically, materialism is a state of consciousness. But always we return to the one. And in this case, the solution of the one and the many is the key striving for this type of soul, and maybe even this can be applied to the monad. So let me read this again, and then I think that's all I have time for in this particular program. Let the army of the voice, responsive to the word. Now, it's going to be always a higher directing word. Let the army of the voice, responsive to the word, cease their activities, because they are the builders. These are the Deva builders on many different levels with many different functions. But this actually, I've been saying the army of the voice, but actually, interestingly, it really says the army of the Lord. So I'm so used to thinking in terms of the army of the voice that I looked at that word Lord and just said voice. But anyway, it's the same thing. Let the army of the Lord, responsive to the word, cease their activities. So silence will reign. Let knowledge end in wisdom. Let the point vibrating become the point quiescent, and all lines gather into one. You find that as, the common theme, the gathering of the forces. The gathering of the forces and streams of energy into one. This is a common theme. I just can't resist commenting, I guess. I just have to read it through. Let the soul realize the one in many, and let the word go forth in perfect understanding, the word that explains and reveals the higher consciousness. I am the worker and the work, the one that is. Now, this word reveals. This word reveals a higher realization. So now I promise I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to read it the way the Tibetan has it. Third ray. Let the army of the Lord, responsive to the word, cease their activities. Let knowledge end in wisdom. Let the point vibrating become the point quiescent, and all lines gather into one. Let the soul realize the one in many, and let the word go forth in perfect understanding. I am the worker and the work, the one that is. Always behind the outer, we have to find the reality. And we're always so often misled by the outer. And every ray has a way of misleading its those who are found upon it. But eventually we learn how really to find the reality behind the outer phenomenon. All right, so now what I'm going to do, I guess we've only really done one page, but that's because we have this sequence of words of power, let me call them that. So this is the end of a treatise on white magic, number 21, and it's program 10.5, and basically it's 288 to 289. I think that's where we are. I don't think we're any further than that, frankly. Yeah, that's all. That's as far as we've gotten because of this tabulation of, let me call them words of power. Okay, so 288 and 289. And then we're going to go on when we can to number 22, and it will be 10.6, and it will be from 289 to whatever, probably only to 290, because, basically we have other parts of this tabulation with which to deal. So contemplate these paragraphs, these techniques, these ray techniques. Don't worry yet about correlating them with the eightfold and sevenfold tabulations, or necessarily with the fourfold sequence of to will, to know, to dare, and to be silent. That type of correlation can come along. And just to know that there is a correlation of that nature is enough, maybe at this point. And then if we want to get together as a group sometime and really discuss the possible correlation, we can do that. So, all right, looks like we're at the end, and we'll see you when we can. And all the best, study hard, and it's a great book, a lot deeper than people might imagine. We might say, oh, this is a beginning book, but no, it's hardly a beginning book, and much of it has been broken out into still other more elaborative books. So many books are contained within this white magic book, just the same way as it is so in a treatise on cosmic fire. Okay, we'll see you. All the best. Bye-bye.